what's up? It's Marcus Philly here with Functional Bodybuilding, and if you followed me for any length of time, you know that the kettlebell is one of my favorite tools to use for my training and functional bodybuilding programs. If you will spend some time mastering these 5 basic positions and movements, then you're going to open up and unlock a huge amount of variety in your training, skills, and more advanced exercises with the kettlebell that you can do to add tons of variations to your training that are effective, fun, and will keep you in the game for a long time. So check these out. Okay, mastering the hip hinge is essential for kettlebell training altogether. That is where the vast majority of movements within the kettlebell training protocols that we use at Functional Bodybuilding start from. A good swing, a basic swing with a great hip hinge is going to do 2 things. One, it's going to put the emphasis of the power production on the hips and the glutes where it should be, not on the legs. When we do this, we protect the low back, we build great core strength, we build great posterior chain strength, all the things that we want from kettlebell training. Number 2, when you have a good hip hinge, this is how we generate power and speed into the kettlebell, which is what results in that weightlessness moment of a swing or any other exercise that's going to demand more coordination. If you ever want to get to kettlebell juggling, if you ever want to learn a snatch correctly, if you want to learn how to take the kettlebell from one hand and in the middle of a snatch, switch it to another hand, there's a moment where the kettlebell becomes weightless, and weightlessness is what's going to allow you to have all of this different diversity in your skill set when it comes to kettlebell training. So here are the key performance points and how you're going to perform an excellent hip hinge and a basic swing. First, let me show you a couple swings. A proper swing, again, uses power from this part of your body, not just from your legs. The way that we can ensure that that is happening is we start to learn how to bend at the waist and not at the knees. So my performance points for the swing are going to involve getting you to bend more at the waist and not at the knees. So the first way you can see this visually is what should be happening with your body. You should be going back and forward, not down and up. So a back and forward swing looks like me sticking my butt out and back, forward, back, forward, back. An up and down swing, which is a common fault that we see, is when instead of swinging back and forward, we start going down and up. When I squat and lift, I put all of the strain on my quads, not on my hamstrings, not on my glutes. More power is going to come from here. When I do a proper hip hinge or backwards and forwards, you get that power, you get that weightlessness, and the bell is almost floating up. So I'll show it one more time. It's back, forward, back, forward. Okay, the second thing that really helps with developing a great hip hinge is the placement of the hands and the kettlebell handle. Where is that in relation to the body? People try and create these really big arcing swings, big circular motions with the kettlebell. That's not what we're after. The closer you keep it into your body, the closer you keep it to your thighs and to your crotch area, the better your swing is going to be, and the more power you're going to generate from here, the less power you're going to generate from your legs, and you're going to be a lot safer in your lower back, in your core. So what I cue people to do is take the hands, try and keep them as close to your thighs, try and bring that handle as close to your pelvic region as you can. Right between my legs, as opposed to looping it down and out. Keep it tight, right to your hips. The basic swing, this hip hinge that I'm showing you, is the foundation for so many exercises, and it's the same when we do a single arm swing as when we do a double arm swing. Master that first, and then we can move in to other fundamentals of kettlebell skills. All right, before we get too much further into this video, I just want to remind you that it really helps grow our channel, helps us reach more people, provide great content for you. If you can go down and give us a like if you enjoy this video, and subscribe to the channel so you can get a lot more educational content from us as we move forward and as we develop more ideas for you guys to use in your training and in your gym experience. Now you know how to hip hinge, now you know how to create a weightless environment with that kettlebell where you're generating power from your hips. Where's the kettlebell gonna go next? Well, we wanna bring it up to our shoulders. We wanna bring it to our upper body so that we can explore things with our presses, with windmills, with rotations, but it has to start from a good, stable rack position. So the second fundamental that we're gonna look at is the kettlebell rack position. One of my pet peeves is seeing people hold the kettlebell in the wrong position on the shoulder. Now, I'm also not somebody who loves to say there's a right and a wrong way to do things. There's lots of ways to do things, and as long as there's a purpose behind it, I'm usually okay with it. When it comes to kettlebells in the rack position, there's an optimal way to hold it that will minimize injury or pain risks to your shoulder, to your elbow, and to your wrist. It will create a stable, strong foundation for you to do many other exercises. This rack position is a receiving position for the clean, it's a base position for pressing, and it's a place that we do lots of different holds, static isometrics, and carries to build great scapular, that's all the muscles along the back of your shoulder, endurance and stability. So it makes sense to learn what good mechanics of a proper rack look like. Once you've mastered that and you want to get a little bit more creative with how you hold it in different positions, that's fine. It's important to start with a good solid foundation. So here is what I want to show for a proper rack position, okay? The key points of performance here. Number one, this part of the arm, this interior portion of the forearm, should be pressed against your chest. So I'm gonna demonstrate this without the kettlebell in my hand, but I want that to be pinned to my chest and to my ribs. When I do that, it solves a number of issues that I see. It solves the position of the elbow. Where is the elbow pointing? It's pointing down. It's not pointing to the side, and it's definitely not pointing up and out. So forearm pressed, elbow down, and then the last piece is a wrist issue. The wrist position, this would be flexed forward, this would be extended. When we work with kettlebells in the rack position, there's a natural tendency to want to extend as the kettlebell is pulling you in that direction with the weight of the bell resting over here on your forearm. So a strong wrist position, straight wrist position, or flexed is going to set you up for a much stronger rack position and take pressure off of your elbow. A common thing I hear is, Marcus, how do I avoid getting bruised forearms? Part of that comes from practice and repetition, building up resilience in your forearm tissues. Another big portion of that is how you flex your wrist. If you're in a weak wrist position, this will put more pressure on some of these structures of your forearm that lead to people feeling like, ow, I can't do anything with a kettlebell without getting bruises for days and days and days. So here's what it looks like when it's in the right rack position. I've got a straight flexed wrist. I've got my forearm pressed up against my chest and my ribs, and the elbow is down. Lastly, my shoulder is packed down. Shoulder blade muscles pulling the shoulder down and back as opposed to lifting up like I'm shrugging my shoulder. Shrugging your shoulder up is going to overtax the upper trap. We want that down. The common faults I see are here, elbow out, bell up on the shoulder, elbow to the side, and then the extended wrist where the bell is not sitting in a good position, and now the elbow has extra tension on it. One last note about bruised forearms: the shape and the size of your kettlebell matters. The anatomy of your forearm and your arm length matters. If you have a very long arm, then the kettlebell is going to be maybe pressed into some bony structures. If you have a shorter arm, maybe it's sitting down a little bit lower on some muscle or fat tissue. Maybe you have one of the competition kettlebells, a bigger kettlebell. Maybe you're using a lighter weight, and therefore that lighter weight that has a smaller height to it is hitting you in bony structures. All of these things may be at play and could be impacting how your arm feels, and it has little to do with your technique. So think about what the equipment is doing, the size of your arm, and know that over time, with repeated exposure, you will start to feel less pain in the forearm with these tips that I've given you. Take time to master a good kettlebell rack position, and your shoulder health over time will thank you. There's a tremendous power to build strong, healthy shoulders with good rack position in your kettlebell work. Great, we've got good hip hinging mechanics. We now know what a proper rack position is. We're gonna connect the dots. So the third basic skill that you wanna master is the Kettlebell Clean. Let's bring that bell from below the waist up to the shoulder, and here's how. The hip hinge creates great power from the hips, creates weightlessness on the kettlebell. The kettlebell rack position is a strong, powerful shoulder position that's going to allow you to do a lot of things overhead and build good shoulder endurance. To bring the kettlebell from a swing up to the rack position is the Kettlebell Clean, and it is therefore the next most fundamental exercise that you should learn in order to take your kettlebell training to the next level. The Kettlebell Clean starts with a swing and ends in a rack position. The mechanics of the Kettlebell Clean will also aid you in learning how to do a proper kettlebell snatch. Now, most importantly, remember that the starting and the end points we've already discussed in skills 1 and 2. Nothing changes about those mechanics. When I do a kettlebell clean, I still want a good hinge and a good rack position when I finish. I do not want to use my legs and go into a poor rack position. The most common mistake that we see when people do kettlebell cleans and kettlebell snatches, outside of poor finishing positions and poor hip hinges, is the arc that the kettlebell takes. When we swing, the arc of the kettlebell takes the kettlebell away from the body. Now that is due to the backwards and forwards nature of how we're using our hips to drive momentum into the kettlebell. When we do a clean, we do not want the kettlebell to get far away from us. Kettlebells getting far away from you when you're doing cleans and snatches results in things hitting your body aggressively, things hitting your forearms aggressively, and you getting off balance. What I mean by that, and I'll show you, is if I swing it out and then bring it back into my body, it's like a big thud. It's like I'm getting hit by a 44-pound kettlebell. Oh yeah, that's right. This cannonball just blasted into my shoulder. So how do we avoid that? We avoid that by learning how to keep the bell close to us. This is a critical point in the development of this skill. When you swing with your hips and you hinge correctly, you're not using your arm, you're using the power from your lower body. Once that power has been fully expressed and you extend your hips, there is that weightlessness moment that we've discussed, where the kettlebell is moving on its own, it's got momentum, and it is at that point that you want to start to guide the kettlebell, not pull it, but guide it close to your body. So with a kettlebell clean, I'm going to give it the same power forward that I would normally, but once I finish my hip extension, squeeze my glutes. I'm going to guide the kettlebell close to my body. How do you guide it? You guide it by letting the elbow bend and bringing it up to the side of your body before you take your kettlebell rack position. If I guide it close to my body and the bell is weightless, which it should be from a powerful hip extension, assuming the kettlebell rack position is as simple as bringing your thumb to your chest. I'm up, thumb to my chest, and the kettlebell rolls around your wrist into a safe position without blasting you like a cannonball launched at your body. Again, keep it close and thumb to chest. Thumb to chest. Thumb to chest. If you feel yourself getting hit, then guide it more close to your body. For some, a very effective drill is once you've learned some of these mechanics, you stand in front of something that's immovable, a wall, and you perform cleans in front of that wall to remind you not to swing the kettlebell out in front of you. You'll have to play back and forth. The more you keep it close to your body, you may start to forget that you're using your hips and you're supposed to hinge. So then move away from the wall, practice a few swings, single arm swings, 1, 2, 3, clean. 1, 2, 3, clean. And then the last piece that I'll give you, and we'll come back to this in the snatch, is that when we're doing single arm swings into a clean or into a snatch, we got to figure out how we're going to position our hand as we go between our legs. And the coaching point is thumb points in. So as I'm doing my single arm swings, my thumb goes in, which then facilitates the roll around of the wrist into my rack position to finish my clean. Work on those points for the kettlebell clean, master that, and then we can move on. The kettlebell has arrived at your shoulder. You're in a strong rack position after a good clean where you used your hip hinging mechanics. We're moving on to skill number 4. We're going to look at pressing patterns. What is a proper way to press, and how should you be thinking about positioning your shoulder, your wrist, and your upper extremity as you go overhead with the kettlebell. Let's take a look. Next up, we're going into kettlebell pressing mechanics. Pressing mechanics I find to be important because it's going to allow us to not only reinforce that kettlebell rack position, it's going to help us understand how our wrist position and mechanics affect our ability to press in a strong way. We're going to understand a little bit about how the shoulder is supposed to move in space as we go up over our head. And maybe most importantly, it's going to help us to learn our overhead receiving position for what will become the snatch next. So, a couple presses. So the things that I want to point out here, again, we're back in that rack position. We're starting with forearm and wrist to chest and ribs, elbow down, wrist is straight and flexed a little bit. You should see the back of my hand when I start, and then when I press to the top, you're seeing the front of the other side of my wrist, my palm side. Okay, so in the act of pressing a kettlebell, there's a natural rotation that happens. And so it doesn't work to press in a straight line up overhead. It makes a lot more sense with your anatomy and how it feels comfortable for most people and strongest to press in a slight looping action. What that does is it allows you to find the best position for optimal force production and for shoulder health. And that's going to look slightly different for each person. The other thing that happens when we press in that direction is that we can start to engage some of the stability muscles, even the lats and the lower traps or the scapular muscles that are going to be the base for pressing and for receiving weight overhead. When I'm in this overhead position, a lot of these structures down here in my lat and my shoulder girdle have to be stable for me to receive something up here, like a snatch. So we're going to be focused on, as I press up, we're taking that wrist that's pointed in towards our body and we're looping it out and up, and then keeping, again, that shoulder blade packed down to create a good, solid, stable foundation. The lats turned on as we go down and as we go up. The principal muscles that are getting worked in the kettlebell press as we go overhead are, of course, the delts, the triceps, these muscles, these pressing muscles, these elbow extensors. But having that good solid foundation from lats, from lower traps, from your muscles in your shoulder blade is pivotal to creating a good foundation overhead, so that when we move to snatching, we have some place to receive the weight as it goes from below our waist to over our head. So let's review the kettlebell pressing mechanics. We got to start from a good rack position. When we receive at the top, our wrist is going to be forward. We're going to keep our bicep close to our ear, and we're going to keep a solid, stable foundation by flexing some of the lat muscles, some of these intercostal rib muscles, and the muscles on my back, upper back like the shoulder blade, and then back down to that starting position. Common faults are pressing from here and missing all of this range. And as I stated before, this is the range when the kettlebell is loaded in this position, the proper rack, we're going to build great shoulder health. So keep your shoulders strong and healthy and build a good base for our next movement to come. Connecting the dots from one position to the next. This is what defines movement. We had a hip hinge. We did a clean to move from below the waist to the shoulder. Then we took it from the shoulder with pressing mechanics to overhead. We're connecting dots. The dot that many of you have a hard time connecting is going from below the waist to overhead, which brings us to number 5, the kettlebell snatch. Here are some fundamental skills that you need to master in order to do an effective kettlebell snatch. Let's go ahead and dive into it right now. Okay, the kettlebell snatch, the movement that gives people the most trouble, that shows up in even some intermediate and some beginner programs, going from below the waist to overhead. I'll demonstrate a few. We've built up in such a logical, sensible way from the hinge to then the rack position, which allowed us to learn the clean. Once we had the clean, we could press, and now we're overhead. Now we're going to basically regress back, or sorry, move back to what the clean mechanics were and apply it with a bit more power to go overhead. Essentials of this are powerful hip hinging. If you do not hip hinge powerfully and create the weightlessness of this kettlebell, you're going to run into a lot of issues with banging of the kettlebell against the forearm. This is the most common complaint amongst people learning kettlebells that drives them away from using this amazing training tool and implement. They will have an experience with the kettlebell snatch where they walk away with bruised arms and they say, you know what, that's not for me. But if you can get over this hurdle and you can really master this, there is a wide range of movements that you'll have access to that are fun, diverse, dynamic, involve coordination, and can elevate your fitness in a ton of ways. So spend some time here and know that you probably will get bruised up a little bit along the way, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So here we go. Number 1, that hip hinge has to be extremely powerful. We're still pointing the thumb in and we're getting a powerful hip hinge. The high pull, or keeping it close to the body that we did with the clean, is gonna get exaggerated even more. We're gonna pull that thing even higher, and we're gonna use a little bit of upright rowing, not aggressively, it's still weightless, but remember, we're guiding that now over our head. So the high pull is looking more like that. And as you can see, that bell is very much weightless, and I'm getting it there with a powerful hip hinge. Now, that is about the height that I'm thinking about pulling the kettlebell for my snatch. Because at this point, the rest of the movement is pushing my arm up to the ceiling, finishing that press. If I push my arm to the ceiling with that kettlebell close to my body and with momentum on it, it will rotate around my wrist and will arrive at the same time my arm hits the top. The rotation that we talked about before in the clean is also critical, because that's what's gonna send the kettlebell around your wrist. So let's take a look. Notice that when my hand reaches the top of the snatch, that is the moment that the kettlebell comes in contact with my forearm. That is what keeps it from getting beat up and bruised. Again. There's an aggressive punch at the top where I'm pushing my hand to the ceiling once the kettlebell gets to about head height. This is the part that's risky, and this is the part that people hesitate on. And when you hesitate, that's when you get slapping of the forearm with the kettlebell. So hesitation looks like that, where I don't release my hand and my grip. It's and then I punch forward at the very last second, and it's too late. The other fault that we talked about before was swinging the kettlebell too far out in front of us. If it's too far out in front of us, that is going to also result in looping kettlebells onto the forearm. This is painful on your forearm, can also be painful on your wrist. So to recap, we are going to use the same mechanics from the clean. We are just going to guide the kettlebell even closer to our body and higher with our high pull. Once it's reached about head height, we're done pulling, we're now punching. And getting our hand up to that locked out position that we practiced in the press is where you're gonna receive the kettlebell. It's gonna happen at the same time that the kettlebell touches your forearm. A couple more reps. Okay, good luck. Go put it together, and let's put all of this into practice as you move forward with your kettlebell training. I appreciate you watching this video all the way to the end. I hope the tips that I gave you today help take these fundamental movements of kettlebell training, and then if you want to go and explore more functional bodybuilding with kettlebells, be sure to go to the description below, click the link to the Kettlebell Solution, my Functional Bodybuilding Kettlebell Ebook. You can get that today, and you can go and try hundreds of other exercises that implement these tips, as well as lots of workouts for you to do from start to finish, and lots more coaching tips along with it. Have a great day.